and a warm welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by ctmfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. I am your host, Pushpendra Mehta. Joining me today is Craig Jeffery, Managing Partner at Strategic Treasurer. Welcome back, Craig, to another episode of the Open Treasury podcast.
Glad to be here, Push.
Thank you. We truly appreciate your time and insights as we explore critical topics shaping the landscape of corporate cash and treasury management. In today's edition, we shall discuss 4 topics, namely notable types of payment fraud treasurers and CFOs should watch, Confronting AI mismanagement, a call to action for companies, Citi launches real-time funding for corporates, and finally, HSBC reports that global supply chains are still vulnerable. Our audience can now watch video on the CTM File YouTube channel and explore insightful articles, interviews, and industry roundups on ctmfile.com, either by visiting the website or by following the links provided in our show notes. Let's begin today's discussion with our first story, which is about notable existing and emerging types of payment fraud that treasurers and CFOs should watch. Last month, the ransomware group Ransom Hub claimed that it had carried out this cyber attack that targeted Christie's, the world's wealthiest auction house by revenue. In February, the Hong Kong branch of a multinational company incurred a US $25.6 million loss as a result of a deep-fake video conference call. With payments becoming the centerpiece of corporate finance and treasury and the exponential growth in the realm of payments fueled by technological advancements, notable existing and emerging types of payment fraud are on the rise and remain a significant concern for CEOs, CFOs, and corporate treasurers. Let me share some statistics with you. Ransomware payments in 2023 surpassed the $1 billion mark, the highest number ever observed, according to the Chainalysis 2024 Crypto Crime Report. Deepfake fraud attempts skyrocketed in 2023, increasing by 31 times the volume seen in 2022. This represents a staggering 3,000% year-over-year rise, as highlighted in Onfido's Identity Fraud Report 2024. Phishing attacks surged by 58.2% in 2023 compared to the previous year, reflecting the growing sophistication and reach of threat actors as per the Zscaler Threat Labs 2024 phishing report. Cyber-enabled scams led to $10 billion in losses last year, with business email compromising representing $6.7 billion of that figure globally, as outlined in Nasdaq and Verafin's 2024 Global Financial Crime Report. Data from the Javelin Strategy and Research 2024 Identity Fraud reveals that account takeover fraud, or ATO fraud, resulted in nearly $13 billion in losses in 2023, which is up from $11 billion in 2022. According to Global Data and ACI Worldwide Scam Scope Fraud Report, losses to authorized push payment, or APP scams, are expected to record a compound annual growth rate of 11% from 2022 to 2027, totaling $6.8 billion across the US, the UK, India, Brazil, Australia, and Saudi Arabia. Craig, your organization runs the payment security training course securetreasury.com, which is an ongoing and dedicated payment fraud training program for corporate treasury professionals. With cyber attack becoming more targeted and sophisticated and payment fraud attempts expected to increase dramatically, we are all living with concern and worry when it comes to payment fraud. In this context, can you suggest a few measures to help corporate treasurers facilitate the proactive pursuit of payment fraud protection and detection?
As you provided some scope and scale of this, just looking at things like ransomware, this is not something people are focused on as much now as 3, 4, 5, and 6 years ago. Yet it's still large, it's still growing, and in spite of some of the law enforcement agencies catching some of them by trapping, identifying when money's leaving some of the digital currency accounts, figuring out where that is, and then having some recovery, it's still significant. And so one of the things to help is understanding that they may not be in the headlines as much. You read a bunch of statistics, but they're still very significant and they're growing. And they've grown to the point where even if they don't grow, they need attention. So I think that type of mindset is probably first and foremost of what's necessary. The second is their approaches are different. And so when we think about how do we defend against ransomware, there's a significant element that's the human portion of not clicking things, don't stick unauthorized USB devices into your computers if they allow that. There's a number of cyber hygiene activities that everyone has to work on. There's also this targeting of the payment processes. You mentioned a couple, account takeover, right? Gaining credentials to account to be able to move money directly. The use of fooling people, whether you call them synthetic fraud, CEO fraud, spoofing fraud, whatever the categorization structure you use, it's fooling people to have funds moved or gaining their credentials to move funds directly. Those are of particular concern to the treasurer and particular concern to how we respond. In all these cases, there's a significant factor for the people that are involved in payments, whether it's you have credentials or whether you're actively involved in the payment process, you're being targeted. You're being targeted generally because of the level of automation, or you're being targeted specifically as they gain information on who does what in an organization. And so those examples of the use of deep fakes to convince people to move money, that's concerning, not just in the amount and that it's happened. I think we all knew that that would happen. We've seen the ability to spoof improve in all these environments. It's not that it can be done, but now it can be done by so many. The tools are available to many, many organizations, people, criminal groups, that now they have, a more robust set of tools in their criminal tool chest that they can use and leverage to gain access. So the humans, the people, have to be trained in Treasury, in AP, even in IT. And it's gone beyond what needs to be done for PCI DSS, for card payment security. The data security standards they have are excellent. They're upped every year. SWIFT has the customer security program. Everybody involved in the SWIFT network. There's a training element to that as well. Not only do you have to harden your endpoints, provide certain functions, but the people have to be smarter, right? Because people run and control the systems. And so it's improved dramatically on the bank side, how many people at banks are being trained. It's also improved significantly on the corporate side. However, on the corporate side, there's a significant percentage of people that are trained only on regular cybersecurity, desktop hygiene, important, but not sufficient to protect against all the types of payment fraud. That's an area where that's needed. So you mentioned examples of account takeover fraud, authorized push payment. I mean, there's also frauds of people working to remove security that exists, security maybe with your bank. Oh, this is blocked. How do I remove that security layer, right? We know security is, let's put layers in place. And so the criminals want to remove those layers. And you can remove those layers through people, through technology, through different methods. So this idea of we want to have multiple layers and those layers have to be protected and monitored comes to the forefront. And so that's a huge area for people. So if you don't have payment-specific training that you're doing on an annual basis, you are not a leader in that area. And it's going to be hard to justify not doing that. And the reason I say that is there's requirements of training if you are on the SWIFT network. There's requirements of training if you're on PCI DSS. There's security standards that are in place if you're a high-volume ACH user in the U.S., right? You originate a certain number of transactions. So the payment professionals that run these different networks have been, for over a decade in some cases, and sometimes just fairly recently, been requiring those that work in these payment networks to be more secure. And so this is probably the biggest area to focus on.
That's a very powerful statement you made in terms of payment security training and leadership. Thank you for the discerning recommendations, Craig. Let's now shift our discussion to the second topic, which is about confronting AI mismanagement, a call to action for companies. Artificial intelligence can unlock incredible potential and is an essential part of digital transformation. However, risk management of an ill-defined, continuously evolving, and much misunderstood technology that presents as many concerns as opportunities is a key challenge for organizations globally, stated the Mercer Marsh Benefits in People Risks 2024 report. The new survey report polled 4,575 HR and risk professionals in 26 countries. 53% of the survey respondents say mismanagement of artificial intelligence would have catastrophic or severe impact if it were to occur. The report goes on to elaborate that the improper and uninformed implementation of AI by organizations or their employees can lead to bias, errors, loss of intellectual property and knowledge, resulting in legal action, brand and reputational risk. However, what is most concerning is the over-reliance and complete trust in AI-generated content without thorough or adequate verification, as stated by more than a third of the respondents. Craig, from a corporate treasury perspective, what do you think are the critical concerns over AI mismanagement?
Yeah, this is a new area because of the explosion of AI, particularly over the last year, the explosion of its capabilities and people's familiarity, plus the number of pilots that are going on, how many people are using this. So I think there's a couple areas of concern. We've done a survey, there's information on the survey. We didn't focus on all the concerns, but I would say here are the concerns that I see from a Treasury perspective. One is sharing PII or confidential information, personally identifiable information, confidential corporate information, partner information, trading partner information. People are using these tools to get answers about your specific information. If you're not careful on how you do that, you can pump the information essentially into one of these AI tools, passing information outside of your firewall, your area of protection. That cannot be the case. Organizations cannot and should not do that. Not everybody's following that prescription for what essentially becomes data loss prevention and PII violations. The second one is the top one that you had mentioned that people felt was an issue, the over-reliance on what comes through. Hey, the computer generated, it must be true. It's a god of sorts, right? We send it out, it got a response back very quickly, seems smarter than anybody we know. It's a very quick, in many cases right now, it's getting better each day and each week because these tools continue to learn, but they're not fully dependable. It's a very quick intern. You hire an intern, they give you the stuff in a week, and it's not good quality. I know you and I have talked about this before. It has to be checked. It must be checked. It gives wrong information. It creates data and information and cite sources that don't exist because it's extrapolating. And it's also based upon information that it's gleaning from. So it's summarizing information. So it's a really good search engine and it summarizes things. But because it's doing that, these phantom projections that it makes, it puts out wrong stuff. It misses stuff. It doesn't have all the judgment. And so you have to train it. It's like someone who's really smart but doesn't know anything and it's responding very quickly. And so that is the area where you rely on that information and it's wrong. And we even saw that with a lawyer who had referenced in their defense had quoted cases that didn't exist. Their defense for that was, I thought this was a really good search engine because it referenced cases, like it gives them references that don't exist. And so some of that training has to make sure it's not making stuff up. And it does make stuff up because generative AI, that's the purpose of it, to make things up. And so when should it not do that? And there is definitely over-reliance. And so recognizing the limitations, that there are errors, and that there are gaps that can happen, that's crucial. A couple other areas that might not be as big of a concern push to me is it's wasted words. The TLDR, too long, didn't read. People are like, I want it to sound good, so I type in some stuff, I send it through the generator, and I make a 6-paragraph thing where I could have said, the answer could have been yes, Wednesday at 5 p.m. No, instead it's like multiple paragraphs. And so we have people generating far more content than is necessary to be concise. The other is this battle of the machines. When there's too much that's generated, someone says, summarize this long email. And like, hopefully it summarizes and says, yes, Wednesday at 2 p.m. works. But we have this, we expand stuff only to summarize it down and we get farther away from it. We still need to communicate efficiently. Those are some of the things that I see as concerns there. The information, the access, because you have to protect your information. It has to be kept behind the firewalls. And much of our data is in the cloud, but it's stored and it's only your company can access it. We have to make sure we're not pushing anything out. We have rules for our company. We have multiple pilots going on. We never push that information out. And we have tools, and some of those capabilities are coming into the tools so you can operate those tools within your network without anything going externally. There's some advantages there, but it's a pilot. You want to learn from it, not just assume it's right.
Do you think, there's a follow-up question, do you think the survey mentions the over-reliance in AI? So in terms of critical thinking and problem-solving skills, particularly for younger treasury professionals, do you think that could also be a problem in years to come?
I think it's been a problem since before AI. We don't have a sense of magnitude or proportion. Like when people say some things, you need to say, that's not possible. That's bigger than 10 times the US economy. That's not what's passing through the ACH network every week. I mean, if someone comes up and says something that's not reasonable, we have to have the ability to make sure, is this reasonable? Is it close? And then is it right? And so if we don't have any sense of measurement or proportion, it spits out something and we have no basis to say, is this the right size, the right color? Does it have that information? I think some of those issues are going to be resolved if we get smarter about things, like the way we ask questions and the way we ask it to compare the size of other things for proportionality. Is there any triangulating information that helps us make sure we get in the right neighborhood? I think we need to do those things, just like we have double entry accounting, we have cite your sources. We have to do those things with AI to help us get there quickly. But there's a judgment level for that. For those that understand what goes on, they'll be very good trainers because they can keep these really quick tools working within the parameters that exist.
You raised some very interesting points, Craig. Let's move on to the next story, which is about Citi announcing the launch of real-time funding, or RTF, in addition to its real-time treasury suite of solutions for corporate clients. The solution is now available in Australia, Hong Kong, and the UK, and the bank plans to expand to additional markets later this year. Citi Real-Time Funding, or RTF, enables the automated movement of funds between cross-border accounts based on predefined rules set by the client. This aims to help them ensure that cash is available when and where needed. Craig, as a neutral observer, how do you think Citi's real-time funding will assist corporate treasurers?
I'm not so neutral on this. There's two thoughts that came as I read this push. One thing was, in what way is this not remarkable? And in what way is this remarkable? In what way it's not remarkable is the concept of saying you can move money around your bank where you need it quickly is not remarkable. And then when you expand that to across the globe, across different jurisdictions and different currencies, then it becomes pretty remarkable and very noteworthy. And that got me quite interested in this. I think it's important. We've been talking about money following the sun. As sun sets in one area, you move your liquidity to another part of the globe and you have it follow the sun. As day breaks in Europe, the funds are there, and then it moves over to North America and then around the globe. That's really important that we do that. And that's been how we've organized and thought about those things with pooling structures. Can we have money anywhere in the globe whenever we need it so it can follow the need, not just the sun, and doing it almost instantly? And Citi is a huge bank. We're one of the trillion-dollar banks that has operations in so many countries. And so this is quite a significant accomplishment. And as they continue to expand it across the rest of their footprint, very useful. So this real-time treasury funds concentration, I think in some ways is notably additive to some of the cash pooling things that go on.
Well, Craig, thank you for sharing your valuable viewpoint. Next up, let's delve into the fourth story, which is about supply chain finance. As global supply chains become more complex and geopolitical uncertainty increasingly impacts global trade, to changing the nature of trade flows, supply chain finance can be an important tool to help eliminate risk, according to Building Resilient Supply Chains Amid an Uncertain Geopolitical Landscape, a new HSBC report published in collaboration with the Procurement Leaders Network. As such, trade experts advise that companies rethink their approach to sourcing, focusing on building supply chains that are transparent and, where possible, simpler, resilient to geopolitical risks, sourced from markets closer to home, and not reliant on one sole supplier of goods and materials. Supply chain finance, or SCF, is another important tool that companies can leverage to decouple their financial supply chain from their physical supply chain, says America's head of Global Trade Solutions, Marisa Adams. Craig, we are living in a higher for longer interest rate environment. In such an environment, how can an intelligently designed supply chain finance program benefit corporations or their treasury departments?
This was a good article. That's a helpful question too, because what's the interplay between the financial supply chain and the physical supply chain, what needs to be done. And you gave a quote from Marissa about companies can leverage to decouple their financial supply chain from their physical supply chain. Right? I mean, that whole idea of we want to be moved to just in time, reduce physical items out of the supply chain to free up the capital. And we've seen disruptions can be far more impactful than the efficiencies that you can gain from that in particular areas, right? You have the phrase, maybe your father said that to you, is a nickel holding up a dollar, or whatever. Something about there's some small piece that holds up the sale. They can't complete a car because there's a $2 item that's not there. And so you're not selling some really expensive vehicle because there was a short supply of some tiny item. And you have examples of that through history, right? For want of a nail, the shoe was lost. For want of a shoe, the horse was lost. And so the whole battle was lost because of a nail. And there's elements of the supply chain that have a giant leverage impact. And so I thought this was useful. One of the items that was talked about in this HSBC report had to do with, I would refer to it as calibration. They had said, don't just put things in tiers, but focus on those things that are the highest risk, where the greatest dangers lie, which is whether you group by tiers or whether you group them by individual items or potential impact, you're calibrating things so you're paying attention to what's most likely to get you or have an impact. And I think that's helpful both in the physical supply realm for sure, but there's a repercussion or amplification in the financial supply chain, how we think about those items and what we do to support the physical supply chain efficiently. And so I know there's discussions about, hey, don't tie up your inventory, get it too short, have alternative suppliers for certain things. But this idea of how do we leverage the finance world to support what's necessary was most crucial. And so the idea that we can calibrate those, we can group those, we can look at alternatives, is in a lot of ways, it's a call for Treasury and finance to be a partner, not to be just a vendor that says, here's the cash you need, but to partner to support what goes on and understanding that more clearly, and then getting the tools, the third parties, if they're providing funding in the supply chain to support that, not necessarily always taking ownership, but to be efficient in a way that optimizes working capital, optimizes the supply chain in light of physical disruptions. You even mentioned the for higher, for longer interest rates, right? There's an impact there too, is in terms of cost change over time. So this really requires good, solid financial engineering on the part of treasurers.
Well, that's a really insightful analysis, Craig. Finally, what is your choice for the biggest or most important story of the past week? And if I may ask, why?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know you asked those questions. I didn't even think about that ahead of time. I think I'm going to have to go with payment fraud, not because that's just something that I've been focused on heavily for years, but because of the magnitude and impact it can have on an organization. Second would be the SCF and eliminating risk. Because for some organizations, if you don't do that right, you're going to be bit by that. But many companies, most companies are being bit by different types of fraud that are impacting them. So I think that idea of here's a bunch of existing emergent threats, common methods, new methods of attacking organizations, exfiltrating money, finding ways to spoof, fool people to send money to other organizations. Those are the top two.
Well, thank you so much, Craig. We've reached the end of this episode, and I'd like to take a moment to convey my appreciation to you for joining us. And a very big thank you. Your subject matter expertise has truly enriched today's discussion. We would also like to express our gratitude to our CTM File audience for tuning into this edition of the Open Treasury podcast. Please subscribe and check the show notes for the article links. Thank you and have a wonderful week. This podcast is provided for information purposes only, and statements made by CTM File or guests on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, or consulting advice. For more information, visit ctmfile.com.